The valley burned before we understood what had been taken from us. From the vantage we'd sworn to hold, the world below looked like a painting left too long in the sun. Colors bled into ash, roofs glowed like coals, and smoke rose in slow, deliberate columns that erased the horizon. We were young enough to call it fate and old enough to know the word was a lie. We called ourselves brothers because the word was easier to wear than the truth. Kofi laughed the loudest. His laugh was a small rebellion against the dark, a way of folding fear into something manageable. He taught me how to knot my boots so they would not come undone in the mud. He shared his last cigarette when rations ran thin and hid a grin behind the barrel of his rifle when orders came down that made no sense. We traded promises like talismans, simple vows that felt like armor until the first shell found a gap. The betrayal arrived like a weather change, quiet, inevitable, and impossible to predict. It was a folded note slipped into a pocket, a convoy that passed at dawn with the enemy's insignia, a face that would not meet mine. Kofi walked past our sentries as if the road belonged to him. He took maps and radios and the names of men who trusted him. He took the one thing you cannot replace, the knowledge of where we would be when the sky opened. When the shells came, they found us like fruit on a branch. We buried what we could find and counted the rest in silence. Regret is not a thunderclap. It is a small, persistent animal that lives in the throat. It taught me to taste the past with every ration, to feel the absence of laughter as a physical ache. I replayed that morning until the memory wore thin, searching for a sign I had missed. A word I could have said. The answers were thin as paper. Kofi returned months later, not as a man, but as a rumor wearing a familiar face. He limped into camp with a story about survival and coercion, about debts and threats that bent him until he broke. Some of us wanted to kill him on sight. Others wanted to hear him out. He spoke our names and his hands trembled. His apologies clinked like coins, audible but insufficient. He said he had done it for his family, for a debt he could not refuse. He said he had no choice. Choice is a cruel word. It absolves and condemns at once. I thought of the boy who had taught me to tie my boots, the man who had shared his last cigarette, the faces that would never come home. Forgiveness felt like a betrayal of the dead. Revenge felt like a betrayal of myself. In the end, we let him go with a warning and a wound that would not heal. We sent him away without ardent as a verdict. Years later, when uniforms were mothballed and medals dulled, the war lived in the small betrayals of ordinary life. Thunder made me flinch. My children learned to read them out with my silences. Regret followed me into the kitchen and sat at the table. It taught me to be careful with promises and to measure my laughter. One night, long after the guns had stopped, a letter arrived in handwriting I recognized. Kofi had died in a town that no longer mattered. He wrote that he had tried to make amends, that he had once held a life, that the memory of our faces had been his punishment. He asked for nothing. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with photographs of men whose names I could no longer say aloud. Loyalty is not a ledger you can balance. It is a map with routes that lead to graves and kitchens and the small rooms where we keep our regrets. Disloyalty leaves its own marks, tracks that cross battlefields and bedrooms, that haunt the quiet hours and the loud ones. Sometimes I wake and hear the valley burning again. Sometimes I wake and hear Kofi laughing. Both are true. Both live inside me like two soldiers who will never make peace.